Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys here, hanging out with Wilson Alexander.
Hello, friends.
Who I see wore green in memory of the dearly departed Scott Rabelais.
Sounds like he's gone to another realm.
He might
something.
as well have gone to heaven, as far as he's
That's
concerned.
true. It is called Amen Corner. So.
Yeah. Anyway, Rab, of course, is live at the Masters. He couldn't be happier, I'm sure. We all couldn't be more jealous. But that's okay. We've got plenty on our plate here. We've got the LSU spring game that we need to discuss and break down before the Tigers suit up for their little dress rehearsal here at 1 p.m. Saturday in Tiger Stadium. So, Wilson, let's, first of all, how are things going? How are you doing? You survived the storm yesterday.
Oh, yes. And I hope everybody else did, too,
Absolutely.
as well. I know so many people sustained damage to their homes in different parts of South Louisiana. So thinking about all those people, a good friend of ours, her parents' home, sustained some pretty bad damage over in Slidell. So really thinking about them.
It's not good.
We were okay where we are, and just wrapping up spring football and looking forward to seeing a little bit more on Saturday. Hopefully we can actually learn something.
We will get a peek. We won't get the full view, of course, but we will get a peek. So we will get into it here. First, of course, a little bit of business. If you're tuning in or if you're listening, you know that the Advocate's always been the number one destination for LSU football, certainly, but all things LSU sports. So please, if you haven't subscribed already, whether that's in print or digital, please do subscribe. You go to theadvocate.com/subscribe to join us. If you're a big LSU fan, which obviously you are, if you're tuning in here, you know that there's always something going on, especially in the spring. And so to keep up to date with all these teams and their various pursuits, baseball team trying to turn it around, softball team cruising right along, and, of course, gymnastics here about a week from now, gearing up for what they hope is their first national championship. Keep your arms all around this stuff and stay up to date by getting the latest headlines delivered to your inbox with our LSU newsletter. To do that, to sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider on all our social platforms, but of course, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube, you should be able to find it. You can pull it up. You can subscribe. That way you can catch us live on Mondays and Thursdays. If you don't catch us live, you can catch us after the fact anytime. And if you prefer some other way, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. Just search for LSU Sports Insider. And give us a 5-star rating if you would, please. That'll help us find some other fine folks like yourself. Anyway, so let's get into it, Wilson. Excuse me. 1 p.m. Saturday in Tiger Stadium, and we were just talking before we went live here, Wilson. I think actually it's sort of a credit to the LSU fans and to many other fans across college football that they don't necessarily pack the place 90,000 strong, 100,000 strong for a spring game. Not because it's completely insignificant, but we know that this is, number one, it's not a real game. Number two, it's a dress rehearsal. And number three, you're going to find out plenty. And, you know, the hardcore fans who want to find out as much as they possibly can about this team, they're going to find out. They're going to learn some things, but they're not going to learn everything because this is not a complete picture of what the team is going to look like on September 1st when they play USC in Las Vegas.
No, certainly not. I mean, LSU's roster isn't done being added to, and there's probably going to be some attrition when the portal opens next week. There's also, as Brian Kelly said today, you know, the starters are going to have kind of a quick hook, or at least like the really established guys who they don't really need to try to learn more about. Because, well, the last thing you want to do is risk them to injury. And this is more of an opportunity to find out about some guys who maybe had some good springs, maybe even didn't have a good spring, but a chance to get them in more of a game-like setting and kind of see what you have. You know, this is, as Brian Kelly put it this morning, it's kind of an audition for some guys, especially those who are a little bit further down the depth chart maybe. And I think maybe that's maybe a good way to frame what you could try to see in the spring game is, okay, who passes that audition?
Which makes a lot of sense because, as we all know, having been sports fans growing up, sometimes you have players who are just kind of so-so in practice, and then all of a sudden the lights come on and they come on. So that's certainly a possibility. First things first, listen, let's not bury the lead. We will get to Harold Perkins, but to not bury the lead, which is, hey, this is Garrett Nussmeier's first real chance, aside from the bowl game, obviously the big win over Wisconsin. It's his first chance really at the controls, being the guy with nobody else around. Career stats, just very quickly, 58.9% completion rate, 1,720 yards, 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Wilson, you have said several times during spring practice that he's really sort of taken command. And so, again, this is going to be, another peek at what he's able to do. What do you hope to see from him? What should fans expect to see from him in Tiger Stadium?
I think that you would hope to see from him just control of the offense, confidence, no turnovers, good decision making. That's what you would really hope to see. Took me a second to kind of get there, but that's what you want to see out of Garrett in this game on Saturday. Last year Jardin Daniels went, I think, 10 of 11 in the spring game, and it wasn't necessarily flashy, but he was incredibly efficient. You'd probably like to see something like that. Will Garrett make some big throws downfield? Maybe here or there. Maybe he'll make a couple. But we already know that about Garrett.
Right.
The big thing is just good decision making. Don't make any sort of throws that leave people scratching your head, because that's the thing that they keep working on with Garrett. As long as he has his footwork correctly and mechanically, he's usually in really good shape. And so that's been the big emphasis with him as he goes into this first offseason as the starter is, making those good decisions on the field, not sort of taking too many risks, making kind of the appropriate number of risks at the right time when it's available to him. And so I think that's what you would want to see out of him on Saturday. They actually, as we're talking about like guys who audition, like the thing is like he might not play a ton. I'm sure that the first team offense will like get some playing time in there, get a few series and all that. But like you might end up seeing a lot more of Rickie Collins and AJ Swann as they battle for the backup spot.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, what do you think we should see from those two guys? Since you bring
that one's going to be fascinating because they've really been going back and forth this entire spring in terms of like who's running with the twos. Like I don't know if the reps necessarily have been completely equal 50-50 because we're not at every practice able to count those sorts of things. But when we are out there, it's kind of going back and forth day after day in terms of who's getting the majority of the reps with that backup offense. AJ Swann's a guy who comes in. He's, as Joe Sloan said, he's got a quick release. And when he's comfortable in the offense, you can tell that he has played and started 12 games at Vanderbilt. There's a reason LSU brought him in as a transfer to give them some insurance, a little bit more established insurance behind Garrett. But, he's learning a new offense for the first time. So it necessarily hasn't been like, just took control of that backup job and there's no doubt about it. Rickie Collins has gotten a chance to show what he can do as well. I think he has, just from our eyes, gotten better this offseason. Looked a little bit more comfortable in the offense and more efficient in it than he did certainly at times in preseason practice last year and during the spring last year too. And so, he is, I don't know exactly what to expect from them on Saturday because, we haven't really seen either of them at LSU in a game. Like Rickie didn't really play it all last year and
right.
AJ's here for the first time in a new offense. And so this will be kind of the first chance to really see what they are capable of.
If I recall correctly, and you can
at this stage of their careers,
yeah, I can count on you to check me. If I recall correctly, the only time Rickie got into a game last year was against Grambling, and if I'm not mistaken, he threw 2 passes. Maybe?
Yeah, he's got I think 2 career attempts at this point. So when you were third on the depth chart behind the Heisman Trophy winner and then one of the more capable backups in the country,
right.
You weren't going to play very much.
Right. And no, we didn't expect anything differently. But that goes sort of back to your point, which is did LSU want to go into 2024? And I have to stand corrected because I wasn't so sure they were going to go after one, but it makes sense now that I look at it. Did they want to go into 2024 with 2 backups, Colin Hurley, who would be a true freshman, and Rickie Collins, who would be a redshirt freshman with 2 college passes to speak of. So it makes sense to try to bring in somebody, a little bit of an insurance policy. So we will see what happens there. Last podcast, in the previous podcast, which everybody can go check out on LSU Tigers on NOLA.com.
Nice little shameless plug. Yeah.
We did make mention of the ground game about how it's going to look different in part because, well, hey, you've got a different quarterback who you can't necessarily, you certainly can't trust and don't want to trust to run for 1,100 yards, but also, the strength of your offensive line really being veteran and dependable. And so you're probably going to see a little bit more of a traditional ground game. What we didn't get into really were the running backs themselves. Last year, not counting Jardin Daniels' rushing yards, LSU rushed 281 times, 1,516 yards, which really kind of surprised me. It was a 5.4 yard average. The running backs scored 22 TDs, and that doesn't count like Malik Neighbors and Harold Perkins running for 1 yard touchdown in the bowl game, stuff like that. But that's a lot. But now all of a sudden you look up and you're like, wait a minute, where are all the running backs? Wilson, can you just sort of break that down for us?
It's sparse out there right now. Because I think, as everybody knows, Trey Holly is in the midst of a legal case. He was arrested in connection with a shooting, and that remains ongoing. And so, he was not out there this spring, as he is indefinitely suspended. And LSU, especially when you hear from Brian Kelly about it, seems optimistic that they'll get him back at some point before the season. But that legal process has to play out. He is still facing one felony count of what is essentially illegal discharge of a weapon. So that all needs to continue to go through the court system. And without him out there, and because Caden Durham is not an early enrollee, he's arriving here in the summer, LSU's got 2 scholarship running backs, Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson. And it's a lot of walk-ons out there helping sort of spell them and take some of the carries, so that, because LSU was really trying to be careful this spring about managing their workload so that they're available and fresh come the actual season. And so that's something else that's going to be interesting is, how much run do those guys get on Saturday? I wouldn't be surprised if we end up seeing a good bit of some of those walk-on running backs, guys like Malachi Lane, who was basically their number 3 running back this spring, who if LSU doesn't end up pursuing a transfer portal and running back here in a few weeks, then that's somebody who you could end up looking at on the roster as like, okay, that's probably your 5th guy. If they do get Holly back, then maybe here, like in the 4th quarter of a game against, like, they play Nichols week 2. If you're blowing out Nichols like you should, then maybe you bring him in to make sure that you kind of spell everybody else. So he'll probably get some playing time here. It's thin. They had to really manage everyone's workload, like I said. Because that's just kind of the situation they find themselves in. After having 8 scholarship running backs a year ago, they're down to 4 if everybody's available.
John Emery, of course, completed his eligibility, and the poor guy, heart goes out to him with the knee
injury. Saw him recently, actually, in LSU's facility on Pro Day, and he was in there getting a workout in. It looks like he's still trying to make something of his career.
Everybody wishes the best for him. He did everything he was supposed to do toward the end there. And of course, they lost Logan Diggs to the transfer portal. He wound up at Ole Miss, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, Ole Miss. So all of a sudden, you've got yourself a little bit of a conundrum at the tailback position, at least before the fall arrives. One other thing that we did not bring up in the previous podcast, but we have talked about this spring, was LSU's use of its tight ends, and that might be something that the fans get to take a sneak peek at. Of course, Trey'Dez Green won't be there. But LSU does have, look, this is no secret. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Brian Kelly and previously Mike Denbrock, but anybody who's going to be, coaching underneath Brian Kelly is likely to be trying to make the most out of the tight end position. Excuse me. So you're talking about right now Mason Taylor, Mac Markway, Kamarion Pimpton, and just what might we see starting with 12 personnel and the more frequent use of it.
Yeah, we'll see exactly, how much 12 personnel LSU uses. It's probably going to be something that comes out more when they want that extra run blocker. It's whether or not that ends up being a big piece of the pass game is kind of going to depend on if guys like Kamarion Pimpton and Mac Markway are ready to be reliable pass catchers when the season actually rolls around. Otherwise, LSU looks like it's still got a strong and fairly deep collection of wide receivers. They roll like 6-7 deep. In terms of that position right now. And so if that ends up being your strength and you're trying to play to your personnel, then we might end up seeing a little bit more, I guess, personnel packages similar to what we saw last year in some cases.
Receivers,
yeah.
Like
But they still certainly are going to, I think, have the tight ends more involved in the passing game either way, and especially Mason Taylor, who Joe Sloan described as one of the best tight ends in the country and said we want to utilize him that way. He's had a strong spring. And Brian Kelly talked a little bit here this week about Kamarion Pimpton and Mac Markway. And I think when we talk about, the spring game being an audition for some guys, Pimpton fits that to a T.
Sure.
We saw him a lot with more so the 3rd-team offense at times this spring, whereas Mac would play more with the 2nd-team offense, and Pimpton would rotate in there with the 2s. But this is somebody whose catch radius is incredible, but needs to continue to develop. Physically, he had to get better as an inline blocker. And then as a receiver, Mason Taylor gave some insight into this. He said that Coach Slade Nagel, the tight ends coach now, basically this was at the start of the spring, and so some guys can come a long way in a month. Said that the thing with him was that Nagel kept telling Pimpton just need to run all the way through your routes, and that he just kind of had a tendency sometimes to not do that, and so. That was something that they were working on with him, and he got, like we said, this incredible catch radius. As a receiver, he might be purely in terms of receiving ability, top 6 or 7 on the team. But you got to be able to harness that and actually be able to apply that to games. And so when you talk about like Mason Taylor, you might not see a ton of him. You know what you have in Mason Taylor at this point, but you might see on Saturday a good bit of Mac Markway and of Kamorian Pimpton. Mac is a guy who we know is kind of established himself as a blocking option, but he, as Brian Kelly said today, has gotten better as a receiver, running some of those things over the middle. And so if LSU is going to be able to use 12 personnel, a lot of it's going to depend on those two in particular, because they've been in the program for a year, whereas Curtis Green, when he comes in, won't have been developing and being able to handle it. And so we'll get a better sense of that to some degree anyway on Saturday.
Pimpton, of course, well, both of them, Markway and Pimpton, but both of them certainly almost from the day they got here, they were part of the all-airport team. They looked the part. It's just a matter of, just as you say, growing a little bit maybe. And, as we've seen many occasions, whether it's tight ends or wide receivers, usually get better the longer they stay around. They get better as route runners, so it won't be surprising. Hopefully for LSU's sake, that's what you see out of Markway and Pimpton. This is the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Again, you know where to find all our writers' great work. They're out there working for you. So support your local journalists. Subscribe to theadvocate.com if you have not already. Subscribe to theadvocate.com or in print if you have not already. To do that, either way, you can go to theadvocate.com/subscribe to join us and get everything one way or the other. Get all the latest headlines delivered straight to your inbox, to your phone, to your desktop. You can do that with our LSU newsletter. That's a daily newsletter. It's a 7-day-a-week newsletter delivered straight to your email. Rab handles that. Scott Rabelais handles that 3 times a week. He's even doing that while he's in Augusta. What a heck of a guy. Isn't that great? Good for him. The sacrifices he's willing to make for us. It's incredible.
Good heavens.
But no, he does take care of that. This is one way to stay up on everything and get all the headlines, as I said, delivered straight to your inbox. You don't have to go running around searching for it all over the internet. And it's The Advocate, so you know it's good. So anyhow, sign up for the LSU newsletter. Go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider. We're here live on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube, you can find that channel. You can subscribe. That way you can find us and make sure you catch us live every time. But if you don't catch us live, you can catch us on that same YouTube channel after the fact. And if you prefer to get your podcasts the traditional way, you can get them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. Just search for LSU Sports Insider. So let's talk a little bit about the defense. First and foremost, I didn't have this on sort of the rundown, but I know you just got done speaking with Brian Kelly today, and he did make mention. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves because the spring game hasn't happened yet. We'll discuss this, after the spring is all set and settled. But he did discuss defensive tackles, specifically the notion that LSU, rest assured, is still in the market for a defensive tackle after the portal opens in the spring.
They absolutely are. Yeah, the question for him was, are there any other positions in defensive tackle that you think you're going to pursue? Mm-hmm. And he said he doesn't see a need for it. That's the main focus. Is when you look at this roster, that makes sense. Could LSU use another running back? Might they go after a running back? You can make the argument for it, especially because, like we mentioned with Trey's Holly situation, and if you sustain an injury there, then you start getting really thin. But cornerback, could you use somebody if someone popped in the portal?
A lockdown
could
type
you add
guy?
to that?
Yeah.
What's that?
A lockdown type guy?
Yeah. Would that help you? Certainly. But if everything were to stay the same in terms of what's available on the market and who you have on your roster, because there will be some attrition from this roster, it's going to happen. Then defensive tackle is still just that one position that LSU is really in a bind at, and so. That's going to be the priority for them. We've heard good things from Brian Kelly about Jacoby and Guillory as a run defender. Yeah, thank you. But they need to. He said it himself on Saturday that they're still looking for that second guy and the depth behind him. Mm-hmm. And so that is going to be a position that LSU continues to add to. They've already added Gio Pius from Wisconsin. I think they'll probably go for at least 2 more. But we'll talk about that more on Monday, right before that transfer portal opens up on the 16th.
Yes, we shall. Elsewhere, we discussed the secondary, of course. Corner is a position with a lot of guys. We don't know which guys that they will ultimately rely on, or we don't know well, more specifically, we don't know what the starting lineup's going to look like on September 1st, and we're not going to know coming out of the spring game either. But the safeties, we know we feel pretty good that we know first and foremost that Major Burns, they really want him to be the the star, as I say, box safety or however you want to put it. But this is also going to be the fans, for most of them, their first look at Dashawn McBryde, the true freshman from Denham Springs, and Jardin Gilbert, the Louisiana native who transferred in from Texas A&M. Just sort of reset where everybody stands and what they might expect from these two newcomers.
Well, Dashawn is been able to put himself on the backup defense here, running with the twos a lot, especially the last couple of weeks, and he stands out physically. We talked about him, I think, a little bit on the last podcast as well, as a guy who looks like he could push for some early playing time here. Joel Rogers, similarly, and actually in some ways another early enrollee who's gotten himself on the second team defense, along with Jordan Allen, who's been here for a few years. Looks like he's had a solid spring and is kind of maybe. It's hard to say for sure, but like because Jordan has more experience, he might be like if there was if somebody went down, like he might be the first person who would come in at this point. And but right in front of them, Jardin Gilbert comes in. Might end up being really, when you look back on it, it'll depend on who else you gets out of the portal at defensive tackle, but probably it has a chance to be the most maybe most impactful and most significant transfer that they got, because you already had some other receivers, but you didn't have a whole lot at safety, and so for him to come in, a guy who started 10 games at Texas A&M and 2 years ago before he had a shoulder injury last year that required surgery. He's come in and he slid in right away as a starter there at safety, and Sage Ryan right next to him. That's the other thing. Is like people have seen Sage Ryan for a few years, but this is also going to be his first spring game back at what they really think of as a natural position. Yeah, actually at safety instead of playing, corner like he did so much last year, or he's been a nickel at times too. They think that he's done a good job this spring. He's had one practice where he had 3 interceptions, and so he's back there too. And it looks like those are probably the starters at this point, while those freshmen continue to come along and maybe push for some at least some kind of role.
Another thing we discussed again,
and Jordan Allen too.
I'm sorry, Jordan Allen, played well at times last year too, so it's good. You know now, or at least you think now, that you have depth. You maybe don't know everything just yet, but you feel like, well, okay,
you got some guys in the program at least who you can try to develop and bring along and start to build up the foundation of a program that they still want to be built on high school classes and incoming freshmen.
Okay, so the $1 million question, we got into this a little bit in the last podcast, and we're not going to come up with answers either today or probably even after the spring game. It's going to be a long way to go. But Harold Perkins, let's just start with this. What do we expect? What can we expect to see on Saturday in terms of how the defense is going to utilize Harold Perkins? I'm sure they're not going to put much on tape. They don't want to give away too much and all that jazz, but if you're a fan who's intrigued about Harold and him coming off of sort of an up and down sophomore season after that dynamite freshman year, what do you want to see? What do you expect to see? What can you expect to see?
Probably not much, frankly. I mean, it's like the same thing with Garrett. Right. Like it's the two players, the two players who people probably have the most interest in how they're going to perform come, the opener is Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback and Harold Perkins there at linebacker, but it's also two guys who you probably won't learn a whole lot about in this spring game. I mean, just because LSU is going to keep things really vanilla. Like you said, it's not going to put anything on tape. Blake Baker wants to be able to use Harold Perkins in, as he said, a variety of ways. He's not going to show you that variety in the spring game and let teams get a chance to understand what they're actually going to do with Harold. But that we have been able to, we talked to Blake last week. We even got to talk to Harold earlier this week for the first time in his career. We talked to him briefly post-game last year at Missouri and about this move to the inside linebacker and how he's approaching it and what he thinks about all of it. And he said that, and this is the same thing that he said after the Missouri game last year, so he's been consistent in this, is that he doesn't care what position he plays, really. Keeps saying, it's like, I'll do whatever, because his mindset is, I'm a football player. That's the words that I've heard him use a few times. He's like, you line me up at defensive tackle. Like, I'll play defensive tackle. Like, I'll play safety. I'll play running back. I'll play wide receiver. I don't care. I'm a football player. And so, like, when I asked him, I was like, is this a challenge in any way, basically, to, move to inside linebacker for you? Because he didn't look, he didn't play this position in high school.
Right.
He was an outside linebacker who took away half the field, and he played a whole bunch of other stuff. He played running back, he played receiver, he played a little bit of quarterback. They ended up at Cypress Park creating like a 3 safety look where he was able to just sort of roam in the middle of the field, look like right behind the linebackers, because teams were like avoiding him completely. It allowed him to just like read and go and attack the football. But he didn't play inside linebacker because they had some solid inside linebackers, and it made them worse to take those guys off the field because they couldn't replace what Harold was doing outside.
Sure.
And so, like we said, then in freshman year, he doesn't really play that inside linebacker position, even though he starts out the year trying to learn it. And so, yeah, again, that was a long-winded way of getting to this question. Is this a challenge? And he's like, he shook it off and smiled and laughed. He's like, I'm an athlete. Like, it's what I do. I'm a dog.
Yeah.
Like, he's confident in himself. He's like, but, I'm not making no excuses. Like, I got to go get the job done. And so it sounds like he's really embracing it. He's saying all the right things about this move. And Blake Baker, I think, shed quite a bit of insight last week into kind of how they're going to try to make sure this sticks this time and actually clicks for Harold after it only lasted the one game last year.
That's the real trick,
That
isn't it?
is. And, a part of it has to do with the idea that this defense is going to be much more aggressive. Harold loves it. That, by the way, the fact that he's like, I love how like Blake constantly emphasizes tackles for loss. They're bringing him, trying to get everybody, not just him, but everybody attacking downfield. Because as we'll get into throughout the offseason, Blake Baker's defensive philosophy can be summed up in this. The number one goal is havoc. Mm-hmm. And Harold maybe will be able to really benefit from that. We've already seen him used on some third down packages where he is rushing the passer and coming off the edge. And that's something that Blake kind of was getting into, was that, they'll have him at inside linebacker. And this spring, they've been teaching him inside linebacker, wanting to make sure that he understands that position and can really get better at that spot, because that's kind of the foundation on which everything else can be built upon. And so, if you're you can't, to effectively bring him off the edge and use him in a variety of ways, teams need to think that he's going to be an inside linebacker and can handle playing inside linebacker, which he couldn't do last year. Be effective at that position, and then you start bringing him from other places, and then that's where you get to the point where it's like, wait, where is Harold Perkins coming from?
Right.
And then you have, an advantage there defensively.
Like a Lawrence Taylor. He's not Lawrence Taylor, okay?
Yeah.
That was the greatest defensive player of all time, but use him in a similar way where you have to, the first thing the offense does when they break the huddle is go figure out where that guy is, and then try to adjust to it.
Exactly. Now that was what LSU thought was going to happen last year.
That's right.
That's what Brian Kelly talked about a lot last offseason, and it didn't come to fruition. And so there's some understandable and reasonable skepticism publicly about this, and we're not going to really be able to. I think that skepticism will continue all the way until we actually see him play against USC, and even maybe a couple games after that, to see if it sticks and if this is really going to be effective, because of the way it went last year. But it sounds like that's kind of the plan that they have to try to make sure that it works. Blake has said a few other things on top of that. He noticed that Harold just needed to be able to play more with more of instincts. Because Harold's at his best when he's just seeing ball, getting ball.
Yep.
And linebacker play in general, they both said, is best when when you're not reacting. LSU was reacting so much last year. And so they want to be able to foster that through just more reps, and also simplifying everything. Blake's defense at its heart is something that gives offenses different looks, tries to make things complicated on offenses, but then simple for its own players. And so he had a really interesting quote here. It was like, if you make things simple for your players and put them in positions that they can handle, they will succeed.
Of course.
He's like, you're a bad coach if you know that they can't do something and try to make them do it anyway. And so that's he believes that Harold can do this, and they're going to continue down this path.
Big year coming up for Harold Perkins, obviously, because he'd like one day to make it to the NFL, and this is one more thing.
This is his draft year. He's got to get it done.
Yep. Elsewhere, again, speaking about things that we're not going to see a full picture of coming out of a spring game, certainly on special teams, as you know, special teams usually aren't live. I mean, the punter the kickoff guy will kick it off, but there's not going to be a return. They'll blow the whistle. Same with the punts. You're not going to have some poor punt return to get blown up, by a gunner coming down the field. But we do need to talk about special teams. It wasn't anything that we touched on the previous couple of podcasts. This is something, again, that it's not a big deal until you realize you don't have somebody who's really good at it. Jay Bramblett obviously completed his eligibility this past year. He didn't have to do a whole lot last year because he was barely ever on the field because LSU never punted. But look, this is one of those, hey, come on, you guys are going to talk about the punter. Well, Yeah, we're going to talk about the punter because all of a sudden, if you look up and you have a punter who's, putting 28-yard kicks out there, then all of a sudden you've got a special teams problem and a field position problem. So what do we know? Peyton Todd is back. They've got a walk-on Badger Hargett. What do we know?
Well, we know that Peyton Todd is at this moment, their starting punter,
Right.
and for the first time in his career, he's I guess a fourth-year guy at this point.
Yes.
And this is when we talk. I think, like, again, when the best way to frame this spring game is auditions for people. This is an audition for Peyton Todd. Being in the stadium in what is at least more of, compared to practice, a game like atmosphere, you got to go show you can punt, you
Right.
can pin people deep, you can get some hang time. When we saw him punting at practice, it was a little bit shaky. He's got a powerful leg, but the accuracy wasn't always there, and it wasn't always consistent. Is that something that LSU's going to have to address? He's got to be able to show that he can do that. If not him, then Badger's got to show he can do it. Aaron Burrell, who's their incoming, he's more of a kicker, but I think he does have some punter experience. Maybe he could be a factor, or again, Peyton could settle all of that and just show that he can be the punter. But it is something that he has to go and prove that he can do because it hasn't happened before.
Right. Kicker, you feel like you're really in good shape.
There's a lot of confidence in Damian Ramos. Right. Kelly said today he's had a strong spring. And then Nathan Dybert, their kickoff specialist, was out this spring with an apparent injury of some kind. But Ramos, they feel really good about as he continues to get older and play more. And then, Slade Roy at long snapper, they feel good, as Kelly said, about like the operation at PAT and field goal. And then, returner, again, like you said, it's probably not going to be like live. So like, are we really going to get a sense of anything?
That was the next thing.
But like Zavion Thomas is, probably going to be that guy, and it's going to be fascinating to see, because when Kelly was asked about him, Kelly really sort of didn't place an emphasis on really transforming the punt return game. Kind of sort of brushed it off a little bit in his answer at the start of the spring. But Zavion is a guy who averaged 12.6 yards per return over the last 2 years at Mississippi State. So you would think he can make a difference.
That's I was going to okay, he can. You're not going to see him take one and run it back with bodies flying everywhere, because that doesn't happen in a spring game or really that much in practice anymore. But yes, just as you said, we will be able to see if he can catch a punt cleanly, which he's certainly done the previous 2 years at Mississippi State. As you said, 29 punt returns, 365 yards, 12.6 yard average, and he did take one back for a touchdown. With that, I will just sort of bring up the last
I got
topic.
a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so auditions.
Yep.
Who do you want to see audition?
Oh, well, I'd like to see the wide receivers. I'd like to see this is, sort of going back to your, where the starters are. Of course, we haven't seen C.J. Daniels in an LSU uniform. We haven't seen Zavion Thomas in an LSU uniform. But I would like to see guys like Sheldon Sampson. How big of it,
that's a good one.
He's the one, he's certainly put up all the numbers you could ever hope to put up at Catholic High. He's got all the potential in the world. He redshirted because, frankly, they didn't need him on the field last year. But he also struggled here and there with drops in practice and things of that nature. So I wouldn't mind seeing what happens with him. I wouldn't mind seeing what's happened with the backup. You've got a deep. You don't just have a solid veteran starting offensive line. You've got some depth behind that offensive line. So I'd like to see what happens there, and who do they feel. Of course, they're trying to figure out who their new center is. We think we know who that's going to be.
It's DJ Chester,
right.
for sure.
So you think? I mean, you can make that claim.
I can say
right
that
now.
without. Oh yeah, gosh,
Okay.
absolutely.
All
Yeah.
right, so we know
It's not breaking news there. It is DJ Chester as their center. They feel good about the spring he's had. What's interesting is that Cohen Eccles, an early enrollee, has really emerged as the backup center. And talking to people, like their staff feels really strongly about Cohen Eccles being a guy down the line.
And that's interesting. That's interesting because, what's the old adage, whether it's true or not, I kind of tend to think there's a lot of times where it's not true. The farther away you are from the ball at the line of scrimmage, the more likely you are to play early. Well, that would be, he's on the ball right there. Yeah. So you can't get any closer. That would be really interesting for a freshman to come in and be that, solidify that backup role. But all these guys on the offensive line, you feel really, really good about your first team. You probably feel good about a lot of guys on your second team, but you want to see it, right? You want to see how those guys do. I'm curious to see how the defensive line goes. Savion Jones. I don't mean to keep harping on it and feel like we're piling on to him, but at this time last year, we thought he had all the potential in the world and was going to, explode in 2023, and it just never happened. So curious to see what he looks like. Frankly, you guys have probably seen him in practice. I have not. And so has he slimmed down? Does he look a little bit more lean and mean, a little bit more agile, and things of that nature? And it's just sort of the pass rush in general. Perryn and Braden Swinson, as we talked about the previous time. So, and then maybe a little bit about the backup linebackers too. Well, we feel like we pretty much know Penn, Perkins, and probably what weeks. When they have 3 linebackers. So who else is going to be there? We didn't really
Witt's brother
discuss
West
that.
would be that's the 4. That the Weeks brothers will be in the rotation.
All right. So
at
who
this
else
moment.
when the second team defense is out there? Then who's out there with them?
Across the second team defense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is gonna hang with me here for a second while I just try to pull it up in my head.
Yep.
Okay. So at defensive end, Perryn. At defensive tackle, Sean Washington and Jalen Lee / Kimo Macanioli. Preston Hickey could maybe get some reps in there as well. Former preferred walk-on there. Let's see. The other defense, the small or defensive end spot would be Dashawn Womack.
Okay.
And then just yesterday, Jackson Howard informed the staff that he'll be entering the transfer portal, and so he would have been kind of one of those other options there. With him gone, Gabe Relaford, early enrollee, might get some rotation in there, but the Dashawn would be the main number 2, and even get some probably rotation on the first team. And then let's see, at each corner spot, right now you're probably looking at Zavion Thomas and J.K. Johnson, because the first team corners, it looks like at this point of the spring, have been P.J. Woodland and Ashton Stamps. And then let's see, the second team star would be Kylan Jackson, probably.
Okay, from Zachary.
And then your second team safeties, as we discussed, would be Dashawn McBryde and Jordan Allen.
Okay. All right. Well done, incidentally.
Oh, and then the linebackers. Well, hang on, I skipped over them. The Weeks brothers. So.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Okay. Yeah. That's what I was going to get to. Just sort of generally speaking, is when we discussed. Well, we didn't discuss. Okay, this is not going to be a full depiction of what we see on September 1st. We all know that. We understand that it's not a fully formed offense, defense, or roster for that matter. What I'm reminded of, one of these things that you can glean from a spring game, yes, you can see who's developing. It's a little bit. It can be a little bit deceptive because you never know. Maybe the defense is calling something wrong on purpose to see what happens, and then that turns a guy loose, and okay, what do we really gain out of that? But really, just sort of more to the point, we talked about this before the cameras went hot. Is sometimes it's what you don't see, and the best example of that was the 2018 would have been 18 spring game when, God bless them all, but Justin McMillan, Miles Brennan at that time had not, developed in the player that they thought he would be. And I guess, was that Lowell Narcisse? Must have been Lowell Narcisse. All 3 of them, they came out of the spring game. It's like, it appeared, well, it didn't appear to the coaching staff. We know by evidence, by what happened, the coaching staff said, geez, I don't know about these guys. We better figure out something else to do. And that led to Joe Burrow coming in. So it may be a situation where we find out, defensive tackle being a good example. We may find out more about what we don't see and what's alarming that they have to go sort of fix, either with the personnel they have on the roster right now, or with an incoming transfer or an incoming freshman. So those are some of the things I'll be looking for. Anything else that we need to hit before we wrapped up?
No, I'm just ready for kickoff.
You went all the way up and down the second team defense, so that was a pretty impressive display
when you've
there.
Been to every open practice that they have anyway, and watched them quite a few times and written down the depth chart quite a few times over the spring, you can start to recall it pretty quick.
After spring ball and after the transfer portal window, Wilson's going to take a nice long nap and maybe go out to the beach and hang out with his lovely bride. And he will have earned it.
Yeah, play some golf. Pretend to wear at Augusta.
Yeah. Well, you can sneak onto the course. I'm sure nothing bad will happen.
Oh yeah.
It was nice knowing you.
Yeah, anyway.
Listen, everybody, we will obviously in later podcasts we'll get into baseball season, softball season.
Gymnastics with the championship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Next week at this time, we'll be previewing LSU's trip to Fort Worth, Texas, trying to hunt down that first national championship. So there's plenty to keep our arms around. And of course, we do it all for you. So please subscribe to The Advocate. As we say, whether that's in print or digital, go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Again, stay up to date with everything with our LSU newsletter. To do that, to sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And of course, we are here every Monday and Thursday, sometimes without Rab, sometimes not. That SOB is having the time of his life right now, but we love him anyway. We are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider on all our social channels, but specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for that, you should be able to find it. You can subscribe there. That way you won't miss an episode live. And if you don't catch it live, you can catch us there on that same YouTube channel after the fact, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. And if you don't appreciate that way, you'd rather get your podcast sort of the more traditional way, get them on Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever. I cannot speak. I just lost my ability to speak here in the last 10 minutes. I keep stumbling over everything. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. That's the LSU Sports Insider. I will take a break, maybe take a drink of water, and try to figure out what happened here in the last 10 minutes. Why I can't speak suddenly.
We'll get you back on Monday.
Yeah, we'll be back on Monday. I will regroup. We'll have a better plan. We'll have a better execution. And we will discuss the LSU spring game, of course. For Wilson Alexander, for Amelia Cotton, who's giggling behind the glass at all my misfortune, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.